Together at the Table. The podcast from Integrity Music, where people around the world sit at their tables and talk about life in all its colors.
Not to judge, but to love, share, listen, and learn.
Whether you're rich or poor, we all sit at a table.
And when we gather, everyone has a part to play in the conversation.
So join us now as we share stories together at the table. Welcome to Together at the Table, the podcast where we come together to delve into the stories and insights of extraordinary individuals. I'm your host, Andrew Phillips, and today we're delighted to introduce you to Sandra McCracken. Now, Sandra recently earned a 2023 Dove Award for her Bluegrass Country Roots Album of the Year, Light in the Canyon. It was recorded live at Lady Lodge in the Hill Country of Texas, collaborating with stellar musicians from LA, Nashville, and New York. And the album reimagines some of McCracken's most influential church and worship songs while introducing new compositions. Hailing from the Midwest and firmly planting her musical roots in Nashville, Tennessee, Sandra is a musician, producer, and at her core, a storyteller. And her storytelling straddling the temporal and eternal has resonated in various settings, from intimate clubs to the iconic Ryman Auditorium. With 15 critically acclaimed studio albums, Sandra's repertoire spans genres from melodic pop to Americana and even children's music with the national alt-folk group Rain for Roots. But beyond her musical endeavors, Sandra has extended her passion to conservation, creation care, and advocacy against human trafficking. It's a real pleasure to talk with you today, Sandra. Welcome to the table.
Thank you, Andrew. It's so good to be with you.
This podcast is based on a very simple scripture. It's Luke 11:37, and it's when Jesus had finished speaking, a Pharisee invited him to eat with him. So he went in and he reclined at the table. And with all these episodes, we've started them always the same way. We've asked the guest to welcome Jesus to the table. So I wonder if you'd do that today.
Yeah, I'd be honored. Christ, we invite you because you've already invited us. You are the host and we are your guests, and we are honored to be seated with you at the table. So just ask that you'd go before us and behind us in our conversation today.
Thank you. The first question I like to ask is basically about the table you work at. What are the things you do at your table of work? All those things that you do from a day-to-day basis. And we've gone through some of the things that you've achieved, which is pretty amazing. But tell us about the table that you work at.
Oh, I love that image, thinking about that as it applies to vocation. My bread and butter, my day job is songwriting. And so the tables change. There are different kinds of tables that I would be seated, that I would sit around with others to write songs or to collaborate on music. So my work is largely in words and in melodies, trying to bring to light stories through those melodies and to give voice to both my own experiences and theology and how I see the world, and also the stories of others. And sometimes the stories that are quieter or that maybe haven't been told. So I feel like songwriting is kind of a quiet job, and it's something that it's interesting. The image of table makes me think like you could kind of set up a table anywhere to do this kind of work. So grateful for the portability of songwriting as a vocation.
One of the things we've talked about with artists over this series is how that, when artists come together to work and work on songs together, and even when they perform in concert, it is effectively a table.
It's so true. I heard a podcast where Yo-Yo Ma, the classical cellist, was talking about what it means to perform. And he really explores and leans into this idea of hospitality in performance. And he would say, whatever happens when he's on the stage, and it's all is connected to this experience between people in the room together. And I think more and more in this digital age, we are hungry for human experiences where we are longing to sit across a table from one another and have a shared experience of song and of hopefully even singing together those new songs.
I also mentioned in the introduction some of the really key areas of passion in your life, which are more than just music. Worrying about the world, the planet, and particularly human trafficking, things like that. They're no easy subjects to even talk about, let alone be involved in. So you must sit at tables talking about some pretty tough things.
Yeah, I have been grateful to learn from folks that are advocates in more formal roles, like either attorneys, people that actually sit at a table where decisions are made. That's so different than the work that I do. And yet it really takes all of us to be, just to pay attention where we are, because there are small things that we can do to notice and to care about God's kingdom going forward, which in this case is like, justice for the poor and good news for those who are oppressed and for those who maybe don't get to raise their own voice. So they might need someone to raise it for them for a time.
In regards to your music then, did your music bring about the interest in these areas, or was it the other way around?
It's probably different. The partnerships that I've been part of over the years, each one kind of has a relational story. So for my connection with Arasha International, which is a conservation nonprofit that is really in 19 countries around the world, but there's one in the U.S. as well. That was a relational connection. And I met Peter and Miranda Harris, who were really spearheading this beautiful work with scientists, and they sort of have, a poetic angle to this whole thing. But what does it mean to sing songs that would stir our hearts to care about place and about people in a way that is with conservation in mind? So it was relational in the sense that I met Peter and Miranda, but then it also was part of my childhood story because my dad was a biology teacher and cared very deeply. He took us on nature walks and taught us to pay attention to the world around us. And in my lifetime, the world is changing quickly and changing in large part because of the effects that we have had on the creation. So God has made creation to heal itself, but at a certain point, there's a breakdown. There are aspects of that we can take part in now, that there's more urgency than there was even 40 years ago.
In the Christian church today, do you think there's enough work being done in our faith, as in our actions to our faith, in these areas that you really are involved in?
I would say, I live in the South. I live in Tennessee, in Nashville, and grew up in the Midwest. And I would say the church, in a lot of ways, is in a time of transition. I don't have the expertise or the statistics to share that, but I would say my observations is that the church is asleep in a lot of ways. And then there's the other part of the church that where there's let me say it this way. There's the time would be right for an awakening, for people to come awake to the part that they can play. And if we have freedom in the good news that we've been given, if we have freedom in the Spirit, there's a very active part of that. And I don't think we have to be prescriptive about where that shows up, because I think for each of us, it comes into our lives in all these different ways. It might be in your neighborhood school. It might be in the government, in your city. It might be with conservation efforts. It could take a lot of different forms, but looking for where God's kingdom is going forward in it, using our imagination to see beauty and truth and good going forward.
Hmm. Can we talk about the album that you received the Dove Award for, Light in the Canyon?
Mm-hmm.
It's a wonderful, wonderful album.
Thank you.
But talk us through what you wanted to achieve with that album.
So this album, Light in the Canyon, was made at a retreat center, which is kind of an unconventional space in Texas. And I invited a group of friends, a group of musicians, but also a group of other friends that are artists or pastors in different ways, to spend a couple of days together reflecting on a few key themes and these songs. I had this batch of songs, both old songs and new songs like We Will Feast in the House of Zion, and also new songs like Until He Comes Again. Really songs of hope and songs of possibility. We were just coming out of the pandemic, and this group got together it was really kind of a mini retreat where we hit record and also made some songs and brought these songs to life. And so I think what is captured on this is a very shared, communal, human experience of these songs, and people willing to say, yes, I want to invest in this time together. And so it really, I was so surprised and thrilled to receive the Dove Award for this, because it feels like really being able to champion this shared experience, this collaborative experience together.
Yes, and again, it's another example of around a table, everyone working together to achieve something.
So true. We shared meals, and we had opportunities to hike and swim in the river, and just people having some downtime to rest. But as we've all our whole society has come through such transition since the pandemic, and it's rearranged things. And I think we're still kind of unpacking some of the ways that things have been rearranged. So when we gather around the table, it is a real opportunity for us to say, what do we want this to look like going forward? And what do we remember about God's faithfulness? How do we carry that with us into a hopeful future?
Can we talk about some of your family traditions at the table, past and present? Anything there that you'd like to share with us? How special is the table in the family?
That's a fun question. I grew up in a big family, and we had pretty simple meals because we were feeding a lot of people, the youngest of 5 kids, and we always had cousins. And my dad was a teacher, so we had students. He was a coach, so runners and whoever else was around. And so I think that the table was a time of, it was a little bit of a circus. I loved the party of it. I'm pretty shy, kind of a quiet kid growing up. So the table really represented that coming together, and there was just always stuff going on, and getting to hear people's stories and people telling jokes. And you think about the nourishment that happens, that's all because of the social experience you're having in addition to the meal. And then present day, I think we are, my husband and I really try to at least have our evening meal together as a family. And we have 3 kids, and a lot of times we have guests. Hospitality is a big deal for us, and just trying to practice. I realize now as an adult how much effort it takes to practice those, just having people in and stuff. It doesn't always go how you planned, and you run out of things, and the dog barks and whatever distractions are going on. It takes real effort to show up at the table, and it is worth it. And over time, you begin to build these deep memories and attachments to one another because of this practice of just like sharing a meal.
And in regards to giving thanks for food and talking about the things of God, and do you do that at the family table?
We do. So our kids are age ranging from 4 to 16. So you get kind of and then with guests in the mix and their various backgrounds. One of the things that we've talked about is we call it like high, low, high. We'll talk about like a high point, a low point, and another high point each day. And sometimes we'll get the eye rolls from the teenagers, at this point. But there is a sense that even if we don't get all the way through it, all the way around the table, trying to foster gratitude and giving thanks for the things, noticing the things and where God shows up in our lives. And you mentioned something earlier. I mean, I do think we see God showing up by way of story. So many times it's like the stories of things that happen that we don't actually call to the front of our mind until we share it with someone else. And when we're sitting around the table, that becomes like such just a perfect setting for doing that, a place where we can see one another face to face and slow down long enough to listen.
Preparing for the table, because when you're out doing things and your husband's out doing things and, you then come back to the table, how do you prepare yourself to be together at the table?
Again, there's intentionality to that, and it requires communication. One of the things I love about music, we talked about this recording and For Light in the Canyon, collaboration is a big part of family life. It's also a part of making music together, that there's an interplay of communication. So if Tim and I are planning a meal, sometimes it's like text, it's menu, it's thinking about different things. Sometimes it's, hey, you run with this one and I'll run with the next one, because we're both, like you said, going to two different directions. And music is such a parallel to that, because a lot of times, and this record was unique in the sense that it's jazz musicians, so they're really skilled in nonverbal communication. So I loved getting to work with these musicians that know how to talk without talking, and they can, with an inflection or with a lead-in of notes or with a pause or body language, because we were all in the same room together, they can give a cue, hey, we're going to go to the chorus, or hey, and I could do the same with my voice or with my guitar. And I think that's like, that dynamic is, it's just one of the most joyful parts of collaborating, and how we can do so much more when we do things together than we could do just all by ourselves. I can do one thing as a solo if I were just singing a cappella in the room, but it's another thing to hear the interplay between all these people, and something happens that could not have otherwise happened without this set of experiences represented by each of these people.
Jesus often dined with various individuals, the marginalized, actually, those that people didn't want to sit with. Have you found in your life that you have said that your early life, your family always had lots of people there, but do you do that a lot?
It's a great question. I think, yes, I think we have, yes, and I think we could always do more of that. I think we're at a time right now where we are reaching out and just wanting our doors to be open to relationships that would otherwise kind of fall through the cracks, or people that are in transition. I think my husband and I both pay attention to that and care about that. And at the same time, I think it is realistic to say we all have limitations of how much we can take on and how much hospitality we can give. But I think it comes down to really paying attention to where, as you go throughout your day or throughout your relationships, like just those prompts, and my husband and I talk about that a good bit. Like, hey, let's just have these times open, and each of us just look for opportunities to invite somebody to join, somebody who might be a good fit or who might need that at this time. And it works both ways, because it's a mutual gift to be able to give and also receive through giving.
There's a beautiful line in your song, Patient Kingdom. And I can't get the line out of my head. It's so gorgeous. It says, when was the last time you felt steady in the chaos? And I kind of think that this is what I'm talking about with being at the table with people that we don't always get on with or agree with, or that we see that are hurting, that our job probably as Christians, as much as anybody, is to bring peace to the chaos, right?
Man, that line still resonates with me singing it. It's the opening line, and it does feel like it mirrors that invitation of what it is to be brought in, just to be brought in from whatever craziness is going on outside or whatever craziness is going on within us, to know that there's a safety of just bringing yourself and to be welcomed. And I think it's so essential because I think people are lonely, and I think we're all kind of feeling like maybe I'm the only one, maybe I'm the exception, or I shouldn't be here. But I think the more we can echo God's invitation to one another, the more we begin to believe it, and then we begin to extend it to other people. It makes me think just of the holidays and the expectations of the holidays. Sometimes the hardest group of people is your own family, like your own extended family, and all the baggage and all the things, or maybe we bring the expectations that are brought in at those times of year. And I think each one of those interactions is like we have a chance to bring light. We have a chance to start new, just these little redemptive ideas, rather than rehashing old stuff or bringing up the same thing we brought up last time, or having the same argument you had with the same family member. Those places can be really tense, but I think trying to move through toward the light, toward the good, toward the future, and that family building is sometimes really hard, but sometimes it can be redemptive in surprising ways.
Sandra, what do you think people say about you when you leave the table? And you could also answer it on this way. What would you like people to say about you when they leave the table?
I mean, I guess I would just want them to think I was bringing some kind of delicious dessert back from the kitchen or something. I'm not the best baker, but I can follow a recipe. So it would be fun to, in other words, I think it'd be great to be known for great food as part of what you're doing, to bring something, not just meat and potatoes, but something that's actually can bring some delight.
If you could leave something at the table, so maybe something that you'd like to give as a gift, or something you'd like to leave and not take back again, what would you like to put on the table?
I hope some of that is in my work in terms of music and just the songs that would get stuck in people's heads. That's the one thing that comes to mind, just that there would be a blessing or kind of a benediction song, whether or not it's an actual song or just a sense of like being loved and sent out from that place. Somebody recently was talking about just how important it is to bless one another, like to give a blessing. And I think that's like a tradition and a part of our faith that would be a good habit to get into.
You've written a lot of songs. Is it possible to recall a song that feels that it's done a lot for you as an artist and as a person out of all those songs that you've written?
Yeah, I mean, the song "We Will Feast in the House of Zion," which is relevant to this conversation around being around a table, is a song that has been really meaningful for me. And I wrote it in a time when, I guess it's been about 10 years, actually. I wrote it at a time where I was just huge life transition. I was doing a lot of writing and studying and writing hymns for the church to sing, specifically this church in Houston where I was caring for this community. And and I spent some time in the Old Testament, and there's some, Isaiah and Jeremiah both have these like descriptions of what will be that are so beautiful. And one of them is in Jeremiah 31, where it gives this picture of flourishing, and it gives this picture of like whatever is broken right now, whatever's feels like it's falling apart. There is going to be a day when we're going to sit around the table and we're going to remember the goodness of God and his faithfulness in our stories. And so that song has really carried me in a lot of ways. And I don't think I knew what I was writing, other than God gives us comfort through his word to us. And then we share that with one another. Like we were just saying, like we kind of bless one another with that. And then over 10 years, I can see so many ways that God has already brought healing where there were tears. And then other places where he's still continuing to do that work. And we know that that one day we're going to see this in full glory. We're going to see what he's doing in our lives. And so that song's really been a big part of my story over the last 10 years.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Is there a moment as you look back in your life where you can remember a moment at a table with someone, maybe your family, and something that you'll never forget?
Yeah, I was part of an artist trip to Jerusalem about 5 years ago or so. And we shared a meal. We had lots of great meals, but I remember one meal we had that was hosted by, like, a family hosted it in Tel Aviv, and this other family came in to cook the meal. And it was just like, not a big house, but it was just the most lavish meal. It was just like one thing after another. And I don't know, by the end of the meal, I remember I sat and played Bob Dylan songs on the guitar, and other people were sharing poetry. And it was just like the richness of that meal just like spilled over into kind of sharing life with one another. And this was a group of people that kind of knew each other. Some of us knew each other well. And, but it was a really memorable time. And I think now, just thinking about the world and thinking about Jerusalem and some of the deep brokenness and complexity, and again, that joyful experience just gives me hope for what will be, even in a place like that.
Can you tell us some of the Bob Dylan songs that you played?
That's so funny. I remember The Times They Are Changing, and I love his folky, 8 verses of stories. I just love those songs. Sometimes those words come out, and I can't believe I can remember them all, but sometimes I do.
It must have been We Shall Be Released.
We Shall Be Released is a good one.
Sandra, if there was someone or somebody that you could sit at the table with now who sadly might have passed on or is here now, who would that be and why?
Well, I guess I'd start by saying one of my favorite writers is C.S. Lewis, and I've heard stories that he and Tolkien and Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton, used to sit at a pub regularly and meet, which is, that's a table as well. And I think about the writings, Lewis's writings, especially the way he spoke so much about imagination, and then used imagination to write stories about so many other things. It's really shaped my thinking and my writing for many years in the different forms of his books that I've read. So I think that would be, I'd love to drop in to the table there with them in England.
I've actually been to that pub. It's called the Eagle and Child, and it's in Oxford, so it's closer to me than you, but I have been. And you're right, it's intriguing. It's incredible to look at a pub, a table, where people of that wisdom and all that ability sat there and constructed these stories that have impacted our life, not just our life, but our faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I read something after about when one of them passed, like just the description of the change in the relationship between the other two, like that there is a dynamic that when we gather, something happens with the chemistry of each person gathered. And that if you took away one of those people, that it would change the nature of your dynamic. And what is it like to sit around that table? It would change. So I don't know. It's an intriguing thought.
Can I ask you, Sandra, if you sat with Jesus at a table, what would you say?
It's funny that at this point at this moment, I think it would be really nice to just sit and share a meal, and some of that nonverbal communication that I describe with musicians. I feel like that would be the most profound thing, is just to be with. And I feel like maybe that's because that's my most free. Like that's how I understand being with Christ has come to be with us. There's this incarnate, by his Spirit, he is with us. So I don't know if I think about the words as much as just like the physical presence of being with.
That is a beautiful thought about the peace and the quiet at that table would be quite welcoming right now.
Yeah, sometimes when you sit with people and there's a pause or there's a long pause, and there's an author, Sherry Turkle, that I heard her speak many years ago. She talked about the changes in our society, and she talked about the title of her book was Alone Together. And she just said there's just something that you can't replace about that time between. So the time between the phrases. Whereas if you're sending a text or an email, there's no gap. So you just pick it up and, you carefully craft your response and you send it. But when you're sitting across the table, there's just all kind of space, and sometimes there's awkwardness, or sometimes there's just like the sounds and the sensation of like whatever else is going on around you, and you're experiencing it together. And I think it's so important to our being human. And it's an amazing thought that Christ himself enters into our reality in that way, and has and will again.
So I hear that the quietness is what you would like at that table.
I think so.
But if I was to reverse the question and say, what would you actually like Jesus to say to you at that table?
I mean, I guess we have all these assurances that he's given us, all the promises of what will be. And like I said before, from Jeremiah, when he says, this is all going to be all right. And we will sing with our hearts restored, like in that song. And we will feast and weep no more. Like these kind of words, which are words I've said a lot, but to hear those audibly, I think would be, there'd be some real, I don't even know, resolution or comfort or kind of a completion to that, hearing it.
What would you say to people who are listening to the podcast today who are undecided about coming to the table with Jesus for various reasons? Many things may have happened that have confused them or made it hard to get to that table. What would you say to them about coming to a table to meet with Jesus?
Well, I think I would say, the pressure's off, because he is, what does it say in, when he says in the Gospels, like, I want my house full, like he's got a seat for you, and the pressure's off. He is going to draw you to the table and invite you. And it's his job from first to last to bring that about. And I think knowing that, I think just realizing you can be invited without having any kind of thing you got to figure out beforehand. There's no qualifiers. There's no there's nothing you got to do to be ready. All you got to do is show up and say yes.
Sandra, thank you so much for talking with us today at the table. It's been a joy to hear from you, and for being so honest with your answers. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew.
Together at the table.
Together at the Table is an Integrity Music podcast and hosted by Andrew Phillips. The show is produced by Lasting Media Group. Our executive producers are Andrew Phillips and Jason B. Jones. Special thanks to Callie Argent, Bruno Balduino, Olivia Buchanan, Madison France, Alicia St. Gelais, Robbie Moore, Matt Lott, Noah Newman, and John Schneck. Our theme music is Good God, Lo-Fi Version by Special Music from their upcoming album Still Worship, Lo-Fi Volume 2. To listen to more lo-fi and Christian instrumental music, search for Still Worship wherever you listen to music. To learn more about Together at the Table, as well as Integrity Music, visit integritymusic.com. And to get more involved with the show, follow us on socials at Together Table Pod. We've also set up a voicemail at 1-607-96-TABLE. That's 1-607-968-2253. If you have comments or questions, or you'd like to be a part of the show, please call and leave a message. Also, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review our show wherever you listen to podcasts. This helps keep Together at the Table on the charts where people can find our show. Thank you once again for being with us together at the table.
Oh, today.